Most of y'all know I was a trial lawyer for 10 years before I went to seminary, and it's just something you can't shake, you know? And it just sits with you. And today, actually this morning, I was just thinking about this sermon. I was a little worried that maybe people would hear it the wrong way or take it the wrong way, so I drafted a disclaimer that I need to read to you before the sermon. This sermon is in no way intended to imply that God takes sides or prefers any one person or zodiac sign over another. God cannot be labeled or defined, nor can God be understood in any simple human terms. Madison Avenue Baptist Church takes no responsibility for the theology offered from this pulpit and denies any accountability for the unpredictable nature of the sermons generated by the present minister. Now we're clear. That said, my God is a Leo. Now, as a complete coincidence, I too happen to have been born under the sign of Leo, but that has nothing to do with the true nature of God. God is a Leo. A fiery, take no prisoners kind of God. A demanding to be the center of attention kind of God. A loyal God. A God that will drop everything and come running if we need him. My God is not some lame Scorpio God that sits in the background being obstinate and secretive. My God is not some moody, over-emotional, clingy Cancer sign. My God is not some pessimistic, fatalistic, miserly Capricorn. My God is a Leo. A fiery, impatient, demanding, but loyal and ready to jump to our aid at any time kind of God. Now, for those doubters out there, those other signs that are feeling left out, I have two words for you. Read Mark. Okay? The Gospel of Mark is a Leo kind of gospel. It's a fast-paced story with an urgency to the message. In Mark, there's no birth story or preliminary chit-chat, all that kind of stuff. No, Mark goes right to the baptism in the first chapter. And after that goes immediately into Jesus' ministry and the Passion story. A seminary professor of mine actually described Mark as a passion story with a short introduction. Now, my Leo God comes out full force in the beginning and in the end of Mark. Our lectionary today that Stephen read for us is from the beginning of Mark. I just want to find it in because I want to read it to y'all. Very beginning of Mark in the first chapter. And the part I want to focus on is in verse 10, where Jesus is coming up out of the water. Now, in Luke and Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens simply opened and God spoke. But in Mark, when Jesus comes up out of the water, the heavens, it says, where is it in verse 10? And he was coming up out of the water and he saw the heavens torn apart. The Greek word that's used here is actually schizo, like the word schism, meaning to split or to tear or to rip open. The God of Mark didn't just open the heavens and descend to Jesus. That God ripped open the heavens to get to him. Now that's a Leo kind of move if I ever saw one. That's one move, and there's two of them. That kind of move happened in the beginning of Mark, and a second one happened at the end. In chapter 15, verse 38, Mark tells us that in the last moments of his crucifixion, Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was ripped in two from top to bottom. Now, let me just say a little word about this curtain. First of all, this was a huge curtain. All right, scholars have actually estimated from biblical descriptions that it was almost 60 feet high and maybe as much as 4 inches thick. This is a huge curtain. And it was the curtain that separated the place where people worshipped in the temple from the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies was where they kept the Ark of the Covenant. And it was the place where God was believed to dwell. And so in essence, this curtain separated God from the people. And in verse 34, Jesus cries from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And as he breathes his last, this massive curtain is ripped from top to bottom. It's almost like God was ripping through every boundary to get to his beloved Son. Mark's gospel is not a passive sit by the sidelines kind of gospel. It doesn't portray a passive sit by the sidelines kind of God. This is a God who refused to be separated from his beloved Son. This is a God who would move heaven and earth literally to be by his side. This was a heaven-tearing, curtain-ripping kind of God. And that's the Leo God that I know. And that's the God that watches over each and every one of us every day and every night. Now, some of you intractable, contrary Aquarius signs may be saying, well, I went through a hard time, or my loved one went through a hard time, and I didn't see God tearing open the heavens to get to me. Well, as much as a Leo hates to admit it, I feel your pain. We've all been there. In fact, I actually experienced that myself this week. I mentioned that we lost Sylvia, and she was a very dear friend of mine, as she was to many people in this congregation. And as I was working on the funeral and the sermon at the same time, kind of side by side, I couldn't help but think of some of the times Sylvia went through in the last 2 years, and she suffered more than anyone should ever have to suffer. And I thought about the time sitting with her in the hospital, as many of you have done, and I thought, I don't remember God opening up the heavens, ripping, tearing open the heavens to get to Sylvia's side. And it bothered me. It bothered me until I actually went back and reread the scripture in Mark. And you see in verse 9, it says, "In those days Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart, and the Spirit descended on him like a dove." Mark didn't say that Jesus and all his new best friends that were gathered around the Jordan saw the heavens rip apart. Mark says that Jesus saw it, and only Jesus saw it. We have no idea what, if anything, other people saw. And it dawned on me that, perhaps I didn't see the heavens being ripped open and God rushing to Sylvia's side because it was not for me to witness. As a Leo, it's hard for me to comprehend that not everything is about me. But God's not rushing to my side. God was rushing to Sylvia's side. In Sylvia's time, in Sylvia's life. Like an onlooker in Jesus' baptism, we don't always know how God is working in other people's lives. Now, for you fussy, overcritical, worrying Virgos who are saying, well, forget the other people, what about me? I'm having a hard time too, and I'm looking at the heavens and I don't see God ripping through the heavens to get to me. Well, I have 2 brief things to say about that. First, let me just share a little nuance to my original description of God. God is not only a Leo, God is a Southerner. Okay? Which means that God will never show up unless properly invited. Think about that. If you're going through a hard time and you don't feel God's presence, just ask yourself, have I even invited God? Have I even invited God to help? And I mean invited in a real, authentic way. I mean, in the South, for example, folks will say, well, we're just going to have to get together sometime. Well, every Southerner knows that that phrase means absolutely nothing. Actually, translated, it means more like, I'd rather have a root canal than spend time with you. This is not about fluffy, meaningless invitations. This is not about inviting God because it's polite. Have you invited God in a real, authentic, true way? Have you admitted that you even need help? Have you acknowledged that you're vulnerable? Have you admitted that you can't fix this by yourself? You may have heard the saying, if God seems far away, who moved? Well, it ain't God. Because the second we call from a deep, true place of need, God will tear open the heavens to get to our side. And here's the other thing, for those literal Sagittariuses out there, God will open the heavens and come rushing to our side, but in a way we least expect. In Mark, when those heavens are torn open, most rational people would expect to see a thunderbolt or a lightning bolt or some big Hollywood moment coming. But in fact, Mark tells us the heavens are ripped open and then a dove descends. It's not what you necessarily expect. And that's the point. Most of us spend our time staring at the heavens looking for the big Hollywood moment when the dove, the Spirit, is descending in our midst and we miss it. I don't know if y'all have been watching those horrible fires in Australia. Have you been following that last month or so? Just awful brush fires going on, and most of them have calmed down a bit. But a couple of weeks ago, the fires got so intense, they formed what are called firestorms. And it's a phenomenon where the fires are so intense, they literally create and sustain their own wind system. Deadly. Several hundred folks died during those storms. But there was an image I saw on the news that I'll just never forget. And it was a firefighter in the midst of one of those firestorms, tearing through a door with an axe to get to a family inside of a house. And I thought, that's the God I know. That's the God I'm talking about. Because it's in the firestorms of life, and we all have them. It's in the firestorms of life that we must remember that there is a force that watches over us every second of the day. There is a God that will break down every door to get to our side. There is a God that will move heaven and earth to take care of us. It's a heaven-tearing, curtain-ripping kind of God. And a God that descends also like a dove. And in our midst says to each and every person here, you are my child, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased. And the people said,